cover probably the most important and notable part of economics, supply and demand. Demand simply is just the amount people demand of a product at a certain price. So if I priced an apple at $3, the demand would be how much people are willing to buy that product. We also have the law of demand. The law of demand states that the higher the price of a product, the less people are willing to buy that product. And there's a few reasons for this, but generally speaking, the more expensive a product, less people want it, right? You'd rather have a water bottle at $10 rather than $30. Simply, it's just a decreasing demand curve where the higher the price, less demand. The law of demand has three main reasons you should know: the substitution effect, income effect, and the law of diminishing marginal utility. Substitution effect is the idea that as the price of one good, let's say the water bottle, increases, demand decreases because you could spend that $30 on the water bottle on a different water bottle company. There's just different things you can substitute that water bottle with. You could technically use a bucket. There's just other alternatives that are cheaper, so that's why there's less demand. There's another reason, which is the income effect. As the price of a good increases, demand decreases because people's disposable income or extra money decreases, so they can't buy as much of the product. So basically, if water bottle increases from $10 to $30, then people will have less and less money to spend on it if they buy a water bottle. So it just has less money. The third and final reason is because of the law of diminishing marginal utility, which we learned in the earlier unit. Basically, as the price of a good increases, the marginal utility per dollar, which is something we learned earlier with utility maximization, decreases. So you're just gaining less bang for your buck when prices increase. So the law of diminishing marginal utility states you get less utility, so we have less demand. So here we have a demand graph, which is basically the y-axis is price and the x-axis is quantity. This is the quantity demanded, and this is the price at certain levels. Here is a little chart which shows you different points: $1.70, $2.50, then we have $3.30, and then $4.10. So we see it's a downward sloping graph. It's decreasing because of those three main reasons here, and also just the higher the price, so $4 less quantity demanded, 10, but at $1 we only have 70. So you see the reasoning here: the cheaper the product, the more demand; the more expensive the product, the less demand. Now we have supply. Supply is just the amount producers are willing to supply different products at different prices, and how much they're willing to supply based on that demand. The law of supply is a direct and positive relationship. So you see how this is downward sloping and decreasing? The law of supply is that the more expensive of a product it is, the more people want to produce. This is because consumers want more and more money, right? So the more expensive of a product, the more quantity they want to produce. So it's a direct positive sloping line, unlike this one here. The law of supply basically states as prices increase, quantity increases for the supply graph because producers want to produce more expensive in more quantities. As price decreases, quantity decreases because producers don't want to produce cheap products. And then here is a graph for supply. Again, prices on the y-axis, quantities on the x. And the more expensive a product, we see more quantity being made. So $1.10, $2.20, $3.30, $4.40. It's a direct positive line, and it's always a direct positive line. So now we have demand elasticity. Elasticity is basically the slope or rate of change of the curve you're trying to find. So demand elasticity is the rate of change of the slope of demand. Some products have little change in prices when quantity increases or decreases. Others have a lot of change in price with small changes in quantity. So let's look at this graph actually here. We see $1.10, $2.20, $3.30, $4.40. So that means each dollar we see a 10 increase in quantity. This is a positive sloping line, and you can find the elasticity. But for other products, there can be different sloping. Like, let's say the price increases from $1 to $4. For a different product, the quantity that producers produce could be from 10 to 20. It could be 10 to 70. It depends on the elasticity. Elasticity determines the amount of quantity produced for the change in price. Just think of it as the slope of a line. So first we have inelastic demand, where quantity is inelastic to a change in price. So inelastic demand, imagine this. Imagine a change in price from $1 to $4, we see a small change in quantity. That is demand elasticity. So we see it's just the rate of change or slope of a demand graph. Inelastic demand means for a change in price, there is relatively no change in quantity. So inelastic products have a steep curve like here, where we have a dramatic change in price, but a small change in quantity. So here we have a 40% increase in price, but only a 10% decrease in quantity. So typically necessities are inelastic products, things like gas, medicine, and food. This is because no matter what the price is, you need gas, medicine, and food, so people are willing to buy it. So even if gas is like $90 or $100 or even $2, people need to buy it, so it's inelastic. Demand relatively doesn't change. Same with medicine and food. Typically, inelastic products are necessities that people need to buy. The more the necessary product is, the more inelastic it is. Then we have elastic products, which is basically where the quantity is sensitive to a change in price. So if there's a 10% increase in price, there could be a 40% change in quantity. It's just a dramatic change in quantity when there's a small change in price. Elastic products are the opposite of steep but very flat, kind of like here. They are considered luxurious things like boats and planes because with small changes in prices, like a 10% increase or decrease, we'll see a huge pullback on all of those products because they're luxuries. People don't need them. So think necessary products like food, water, medicine, all of that, that's inelastic. No matter the price, people need to buy them. But luxurious, non-necessary products are more elastic. And now for calculating elasticity, you want to do the percent change in quantity demanded over the percent change in price. So think of it kind of like slope, but remember it's quantity over price. So let's go actually back here. Sorry, here. Well, what is the elasticity here? Well, we have a drop in quantity of 60. That would be about that would be about an 80% drop or somewhat. Price increases by 400%. So the elasticity would be 80 divided by 400, whatever that is. That's how you calculate the elasticity, a change in quantity over the change in price. Now, here we have different types of elasticities. Here is perfectly elastic, basically just no matter, perfectly inelastic, basically just no matter the price, the quantity stays the same. Its elasticity coefficient would be 0. Here we have relatively inelastic. It's what we talked about earlier. It's just a relatively low value. For the elasticity coefficient, you'll get less than 1. Unit elastic is where it's a one-to-one change. So for a 10% change in quantity demanded, there's a 10% change in price. It's exactly like unitary. Relatively elastic means it's elastic. So there's a more change in price and there's more change in quantity than there is price. And then perfectly elastic would have an elasticity of infinity, and it would just go on forever. No matter what the quantity is, the price is the same. So we see it here. Now we have supply elasticity. Supply elasticity is the exact same thing as demand elasticity, but it's for producers, and it shows how elastic a supply curve is. So there's a few characteristics here. Inelastic supply products are hard to produce, have a high cost, and hard to transition. This is because no matter the change in quantity, price would stay the same because producers would have to continue to produce. For hard to make products, no matter what, even if they're making a loss, they can't really switch to another product. It's hard to do so. Elastic supply is the opposite. They're very easy to produce, they're low cost, and they're easy to transition. So we see it's just the rate of change or slope of a demand graph. Inelastic demand means for a change in price, there is relatively no change in quantity. So inelastic products have a steep curve like here, where we have a dramatic change in price, but a small change in quantity. So here we have a 40% increase in price, but only a 10% decrease in quantity. So typically necessities are inelastic products, things like gas, medicine, and food. This is because no matter what the price is, you need gas, medicine, and food, so people are willing to buy it. So even if gas is like $90 or $100 or even $2, people need to buy it, so it's inelastic. Demand relatively doesn't change. Same with medicine and food. Typically, inelastic products are necessities that people need to buy. The more the necessary product is, the more inelastic it is. Then we have elastic products, which is basically where the quantity is sensitive to a change in price. So if there's a 10% increase in price, there could be a 40% change in quantity. It's just a dramatic change in quantity when there's a small change in price. Elastic products are the opposite of steep but very flat, kind of like here. They are considered luxurious things like boats and planes because with small changes in prices, like a 10% increase or decrease, we'll see a huge pullback on all of those products because they're luxuries. People don't need them. So think necessary products like food, water, medicine, all of that, that's inelastic. No matter the price, people need to buy them. But luxurious, non-necessary products are more elastic. And now for calculating elasticity, you want to do the percent change in quantity demanded over the percent change in price. So think of it kind of like slope, but remember it's quantity over price. So let's go actually back here. Sorry, here. Well, what is the elasticity here? Well, we have a drop in quantity of 60. That would be about that would be about an 80% drop or somewhat. Price increases by 400%. So the elasticity would be 80 divided by 400, whatever that is. That's how you calculate the elasticity, a change in quantity over the change in price. Now, here we have different types of elasticities. Here is perfectly elastic, basically just perfectly inelastic, basically just no matter the price, the quantity stays the same. Its elasticity coefficient would be 0. Here we have relatively inelastic. It's what we talked about earlier. It's just a relatively low value. For the elasticity coefficient, you'll get less than 1. Unit elastic is where it's a 1-to-1 change. So for a 10% change in quantity demanded, there's a 10% change in price. It's exactly like unitary. Relatively elastic means it's elastic. So there's a more change in price and there's more change in quantity than there is price. And then perfectly elastic would have an elasticity of infinity, and it would just go on forever. No matter what the quantity is, the price is the same. So we see it here. Now we have supply elasticity. Supply elasticity is the exact same thing as demand elasticity, but it's for producers, and it shows how elastic a supply curve is. So there's a few characteristics here. Inelastic supply products are hard to produce, have a high cost, and hard to transition. This is because no matter the change in quantity, price will stay the same because producers would have to continue to produce. For hard to make products, no matter what, even if they're making a loss, they can't really switch to another product. It's hard to do so. Elastic supply is the opposite. They're very easy to produce, they're low cost, and they're easy to transition. Types of elasticity besides the supply and demand elasticity. We have a cross-price elasticity, which shows how sensitive a product is to a change in the price of other products. So sometimes two products are basically linked. Think like ketchup and mustard, think a car and tires. Sometimes products, if you buy one, you're likely to buy the other. So you have to determine if they're substitutes or complements. Substitute products are two products that are in competition. You either buy one or buy the other. Think of the water bottle, but you also could substitute that with the bucket, right? So substitute products are just in competition. You buy either one or the other. Like glasses or contacts, one can be replaced for the other. Complement goods are two goods that are bought together, like a car and fuel or a car and tires, ketchup and mustard, etc. It's basically two products that are complements, and that's what the cross-price elasticity is used for. It's used to determine if two products are substitutes or if they're complements. The way to calculate the cross-price elasticity is the percent change in quantity demanded of one good over the percent change in price of good B. So remember, elasticity is always the percent change in quantity over the percent change in price. Here it's just of good A over good B. If the value you get for the cross-price elasticity is negative, that means they're complements. But that's because that means they're basically increasing at the same time. So if one product has a positive increase in quantity, then the other one will have a decrease in price if they're complements. So we're going to see basically a negative value. If positive, then they're substitutes. So just remember negative complements, which means they're basically like bought together, like car and fuel. If they're positive, then they're substitutes. That means they're bought in competition, like water bottle or bucket, or glasses and contacts. There's also income elasticity, which measures how sensitive quantity is to a change in income. So we have two different types of two different types of goods that a product either is. It's either a normal good, which normal goods have an increase in demand when there's an increase in income. This is because the more money you have, the more you're willing to spend. So if you have more and more money, you're going to buy more and more food, you're going to buy a better car. That's what a normal good is. You spend more and have more demand when you have more income. But some goods are inferior goods, where if you have an increase in income, you actually decrease demand in that good. Think ramen noodles for college students, or just cheap products in general that you only buy when you're like homeless or in poverty. When you have more and more income of those goods, like ramen noodles, you typically don't demand them more, or you just don't buy them anymore. So those are inferior goods. So income elasticity measures if goods are a normal good or an inferior good. You calculate it by finding the percent change in quantity demanded over the percent change in income. If the value is positive, then it is a normal good. If it's negative, then it's an inferior good. So just make sure to remember that. Percent change in demand over percent in income. And if it's positive, then it's a normal good. If it's negative, then it's an inferior good. And then for cross price elasticity, percent change in quantity of one product over the percent change in price of another product. If the value is negative, then they're complements. If it's positive, then they're substitutes. Here's a quick question. I'll give you a few seconds, or you can pause the video. Okay. If a 10% increase in the price of good X results in a 20% decrease in the quantity of good Y demanded, which of the following must be true? So remember, this is the cross price elasticity. So for cross price elasticity, you want to go back to here. The percent change in quantity demanded of good A over the percent change in price of good B. So what's the change in quantity? We see a 20% decrease in the quantity of good Y, so that's negative 20% over the change in price, which is 10% increase. So negative 20% over 10%, we get negative 2. So let's rule some answers out. It can't be A, it's not negative 0.5. Can't be B, first it's not income elasticity, it's not plus 2. And it would be C, complementary goods, cross price elasticity is negative 2. So you should have gotten C. It's not D, it's not income elasticity, and it's not E, it's not E, they're not substitute goods. Remember, if they're negative, they're complementary goods. Negative, complement, positive, then substitutes. So make sure to remember that. And then remember, if it's two different products, you should be using cross price elasticity, because then you're measuring if they're substitutes or complements. Income elasticity is to measure if they're normal or inferior goods, so just make sure to know that. We have to cover different types of surpluses. There are two different types of surpluses, a consumer surplus and a producer surplus. Remember that the demand curve just shows the maximum amount of money people are willing to pay for a product. This is the maximum amount. Anything above that, people are not willing to pay. Consumer surplus is just showing how much consumers are gaining. Equilibrium is how much they're actually paying. So they're paying P1, this amount. This is the maximum amount they're paying. So consumer surplus, this red portion, just shows the maximum amount of money consumers are gaining. So it's just the area of this top curve, the top of the demand curve to the equilibrium. So just remember this, consumer surplus is the top. Producer surplus is how much producers gain from making it equilibrium. So the bottom of the supply curve, this is the minimum producers are willing to produce a product for. So this is the minimum amount the price needs to be. Equilibrium is how much they actually sell the product for. So producer surplus is how much producers gain by selling a product. So remember, consumer surplus is a triangle above equilibrium, producer surplus is below equilibrium, And consumer surplus is the demand curve, the top of the demand curve to the equilibrium. Producer surplus is the bottom of the supply curve to equilibrium. Now we can also shift the equilibrium and shift the supply and demand curves. There are certain conditions where we shift supply and demand. For example, let's say there's new grilling technology that cuts production time in half. Then we would shift the supply curve to the right because you can now supply more quantity in general. So now supply shifts to the right, and then in this scenario, we look at the equilibrium. You want to analyze the equilibrium. Demand does not change because this scenario has nothing to do with demand. So you look at the equilibrium, right? The quantity increases because there's more on the x-axis. Price decreases because the y-axis is a decrease. So make sure to analyze the equilibrium. And this is how you shift the supply and demand curves. If there's an increase in supply, if they're able to produce more and more products, the supply curve will shift to the right because then you can produce more products, right? If they can produce less products, if there's like a recession or something bad happens, then the supply curve would shift to the left because they can't produce as much. The demand curve is somewhat similar. If there's an event that occurs that increases the demand for a product, the demand curve will shift to the right. If an event occurs that decreases the demand for a product, it will shift to the left. So let's say the price of chicken sandwiches, a substitute, increases. In this situation, we would shift the demand curve to right. Why? Because remember, substitutes are a competitive product. It's your competition. So if your competition has an increase in price, people are going to buy more of your product and less of your competition. So you're going to have more demand. So in this situation, we shift the demand curve to the right because there's more consumers, more people wanting to buy it. In this situation, the price of hamburgers falls from $3 to $1. Now, if this was a supply and demand graph for hamburgers, this would not be a shift of the supply and demand curve at all. Let me explain. So when we change price from $3 to $1, we're not really moving the curve. The curve doesn't change at all. We're just changing the price. And when we change price, we're just moving along the curve, right? If PE was $3 and P1 was $1, we're just moving along the curve. We're not necessarily shifting it left to right. They're just changing what is already happening. To change the curve, an event has to occur. This is not an event since they're just simply changing the actual price. And remember, if the price is ever below equilibrium, like in this situation, then you have a shortage because there's too many people are buying the product and there's not enough supply, so you have a shortage. So in this situation, we would have a shortage. We're not actually changing the curve. In this situation, the price of ground beef triples. This is an event because this changes the production of a product. In this situation, supply would shift to the left because the price of production becomes more expensive, so we can't produce as much. So make sure to just keep in mind that this is not an event. You're just changing the price from one to another. You're just moving along the curve. But for 4, 2, and 1, in these situations, you are actually doing something because something actually changes. So you want to shift either supply or demand left and right. Human fingers found in multiple burger restaurants, that would affect demand because who would want human fingers in burgers, right? So demand shifts to the left. There's less demand for a product if something bad happens like this. So now there's certain situations where you shift both supply and demand. In these situations, when you analyze the equilibrium, right? For all these questions, you analyze equilibrium. So in this situation, price decreases, quantity decreases. But let's say it's demand decreased, but also supply shifted to the right. So we had an increase in supply. In that situation, either price or quantity will be indeterminate, either one or the other. You won't be able to figure it out. So if supply shifted to the right, for example, and demand shifted to the left, that would mean price, in that situation, either price or quantity would be indeterminate. So whenever you have a double shift, when you're shifting both supply and demand, either price or quantity is indeterminate. Just make sure you know that. So now we have government intervention. So when dealing with supply and demand, the government gets involved to control and regulate prices, and they do so by price ceilings and price floors. So what's a price ceiling and price floor? A price ceiling is the maximum price a product can be. So in this situation, a price ceiling is set at $400. For a price ceiling to be effective, it needs to be below equilibrium, and the AP test will actually call it binding. For a binding price ceiling, it needs to be below equilibrium. So in this situation, since there's a price ceiling, you can't have a price above here, you're going to have a shortage, right? Because the price is below equilibrium, you're going to have a shortage. And then you also have a price floor. A price floor is the minimum price a product needs to be. And for a binding price floor, you need to have it above equilibrium. And remember, when price is ever above equilibrium, you have a surplus, too much of a product. Then we also have deadweight loss. Deadweight loss is the loss of a consumer or producer surplus, like in this situation. So you see supply and you see demand, right? Supply upward sloping, demand downward sloping. This is what the equilibrium should be. But because of the price ceiling, a maximum price, the price is set here. In this situation, consumer and producer surplus as normal, but we have this loss and surplus that we normally would have. This is deadweight loss. It's just the loss of consumer or producer surplus, and you don't want deadweight loss. It's inefficient. But it happens, and with price ceilings and price floors, it happens a lot. Deadweight loss is just the loss consumer and producer surplus, and it's that area of the loss. So if you ever get asked to calculate deadweight loss, find the area that is lost from the normal equilibrium to what it is actually. Then we have international trade. First, we have a world price. The world price is just a price at which everyone buys a specific product or good. A tariff is a tax on imports and increases the world price, and a quota is a limit on the number of imports. So let's actually apply to supply and demand. This is before international trade, a basic supply and demand graph. The x-axis is quantity, y is price, supply, demand, consumer surplus, producer surplus. But let's say we actually traded with the international community and the world price for this product was $2. In that situation, the price would be $2. So we would set the price down to here. If price was down here, what would we have? We would have a shortage because price is below equilibrium. Make sure to know that. We also notice consumer surplus increases dramatically. This is because consumers are gaining more and more if prices are decreasing. But producers don't gain anything. They actually lose producer surplus because they have to charge a cheaper price. So that's world price. It's just the minimum price needed, and that's how you deal with it. Tariffs would be a tax on this. So if there was a $1 tariff, for example, the world price would increase from $2 to $3. So just make sure you know a tariff is just a tax on the world price. A quota is a limit on the number of imports. So let's say I have a quota of 1,000. That means we can only import 1,000 of that product. And that's everything for Unit 2. It's a little confusing, so I would recommend you go through all of the questions in the description. Make sure to cover everything in this slideshow: supply, demand, elasticity. Make sure to know how to calculate elasticity, the percent change in quantity or the percent change in price. Make sure you know income elasticity and cross-price elasticity. It's a surplus. Supply and demand. Price above equilibrium is a surplus. Price below equilibrium is a shortage. Make sure you know how to shift supply and demand. Make sure to remember a double shift, either price or quantity is indeterminate, and make sure you understand international trade. But that's everything for Unit 2.